one of the biggest tension points, if you will, is that the younger you get, the more of an expectation that passions exist within your own four walls, whether that be a hospital, whether that be a dental office, whether that be a manufacturing facility, or a small professional business. There's this expectation with the younger generation, specifically 35 and under, that passions will be edged.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to View from the Top podcast, where we help family first business owners and entrepreneurs get through the valleys and up the mountain to their very own view from the top. Hey, before we bring Big A in today, I wanted to let you know about a free resource that we've designed to help family first business owners and entrepreneurs just like yourself. It's a weekly email called The Climb. It's bite-sized, action-oriented, lighthearted content. It's easy to read and apply in both your personal, relational, professional, spiritual, and financial pursuits. So you can go to viewfromthetop.com/climb, C-L-I-M-B, to get next week's edition delivered straight to your inbox. All right, Big A, welcome to the show today. Glad that you could make it, man.
Yeah, you doing good?
I'm doing great. You know, we're a little bit into 2023 here now. Yeah. And
I'm always excited at the beginning of any new year. You know, it seems like, I don't know why, but it just seems like that it's like I always love the back nine. If I screw up on the first nine, I can start over on the back nine. I don't know why, but I do that with New Year's. I'm like, that didn't end well like I thought it was going to, but man, I got a brand new year and I'm going to crush it this year. And that's the space I'm in right now. My mindset is at the beginning of the year, and we're in the first quarter, and we've been crushing it. And I hope the listeners have been crushing it. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty excited right now. 2023, it's going to be a great year.
Yeah. Hey, you know, when you think about the year ahead, and I know we're into it a little bit already, but you know, as you think about the year ahead, you think about where you're going to spend your time and energy learning things. You know, whether that's books or whether that's conferences, whether that's training programs. You know, you like conferences, correct? You go to conferences quite a bit, or used to anyway.
Yeah, no, I love conferences.
Yeah. So as you think about conference, I mean, that's a big expense for a lot of people. Sure. You know, it's usually a few $1,000 or whatever by the time you get there and get back and have a few cool dinners and stuff. But as we think about conferences and through the rest of the year, people kind of making their travel plans already and whatnot, like, how I've wanted this myself, like, what are some things that maybe as you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, like, as you think about where to invest your time in conferences, where to invest your money, which ones to go to, like, are there certain things you think about as, you know, as you're kind of thinking about where you're going to spend your money and your time?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back. First of all, you said it's a pretty good expense, and that was my mindset early on. And I don't really look at it as an expense anymore. I look at it as an investment. And the return I get on that investment is huge. And heard a thought leader probably 7 or 8 years ago made a comment that he spends 10% of his gross earnings on personal professional development. And I listened to it again. I said, let me see if I heard that right. 10% of his gross earnings on personal and professional development. And I went, wow, like we do okay. That's a pretty good number. And I went and pulled our profit and loss statement, our balance sheet, and looked at it and started adding up all of the books that I read and the courses that I take and the coaches I hire and the conferences that I go to. I spent more than 10%. And I was like, man, I didn't even really realize that I was doing that. But then I started thinking about the networking opportunities, the resources. You know, you're dealing with like-minded people at some of these conferences, depending on what you go to. And there's a lot of conferences that I like. I'll even give a few plugs for a few of them. Social Media Marketing World, Mike Stelzner does a great job. One of the best put on conferences that I go to out in San Diego. Chris Kremitzos does Podfest, does a really, really good job. Down in Florida, that's really enjoyable. Podcast Movement is another really good one. Dave Ramsey, my buddy, puts on Entree Leadership. He does numbers of different kinds of conferences. And I'll be honest with you, Wally, every single one that I've been to, maybe I didn't learn what I went for, but I learned something that was even more valuable. It was the relationships, the connections. Now, I have to say, at some of these conferences, I don't go just to hear the speakers. The magic happens in the hall, right? It happens at dinner. It happens at breakfast. It happens on lunch breaks. It happens in the corners of the conference hall where you're really breaking down the situation that you're dealing with, the problematic area that you may be confronted with. And so for me personally, I think they're invaluable. And don't look at it as an expense, look at it as an investment.
It's a good word, man. We've got talking about learning. We've got a guest, Chris Tuff, with us today. I know he's a good friend of yours, and you guys have spent some time together in the past, and you have pretty cool intro story here to get us going on how you guys met, and a little bit of conflict, which is always good, I think. So, but man, he does a good job today, talking about not just, we talk about millennials, but a lot today, but it's really about any of the Gen Z and the Xers and all that kind of crossover and learning and man, he did a good job today.
I like his practical application, how to deal with folks, how to understand them, how to have an authentic conversation, how to be genuine. They're starving to death for authenticity, and Chris really gets into that in the interview. Have a lot of fun with him, teasing him. I aspire to be like Chris one day. And some of his, you'll see, you'll understand what I'm talking about once you watch the interview.
Let's get him in here.
But just stay with it till the end. He gives us some practical steps to do. Yeah, man, I'm excited about today's interview.
Let's get him in here.
Well, hey, Chris, man, welcome to the show, buddy. How you been?
I'm good. It's awesome to be here. Here we go.
So I'm pretty fired up to have you. I've been talking to Kevin quite a bit about you, and I was kind of reflecting back how we even got to know each other. And I want to tell the story just real quick, but I've got to make some confessions along with this. And so Tommy Breedlove, our mutual friend, and then Patrick Lewis, is a mutual friend of ours. We've each known each other for a long, long time. But finally, Tommy invited me down to Atlanta years ago. And he goes, hey, by the way, I got this buddy that's going to be there. And is it okay with you? Because we had planned this 3-day weekend. We were going to do some stuff together. And I said, no, I mean, that, to be honest, I was a little disappointed when he told me that, because I was like, man, that's going to detract. That's going to take away. So I get there a day before you, and you and your wife, kids walk in. And I just got to be straight up. I was a little bit like, this guy's wearing yellow glasses. Like, what in the world? And then you kind of tatted up a little bit, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting where this goes. And right. Yeah. And so that night, we get through with dinner. We sat there hours. I don't know how long, hours and hours, and talked. And I went in the bedroom and I called Robin, and I said, she goes, how'd that go with that new guy? I said, Robin, I made this judgment when I saw him. This guy's going to be way out there. And I said, I love this guy. I said, I could have talked to him all night. But here's the thing that's cool out of that. You never know how you influence people. So several months ago, Robin and I went to Warby Parker, and I had to get some new glasses. And
look at that.
Clear. They're not yellow. I couldn't do yellow. Okay, but it's a step in the right direction.
That is definitely the right direction. I like it.
Impact. I'm going to wear them during the interview here because I feel like kind of cool. And,
well, you look cool. You just upgraded your style by 30 notches, Aaron.
I know, but listen, it goes a step further, because I want you to know, Kevin told me a year ago, he goes, Big A, your clothes are old. And I don't want to hurt your feet. I'm like, okay, so I go buy a new wardrobe. And I went recently and bought some new tennis shoes. I did go with the yellow. I went with the Hoka yellow, Big A with Hokas. And I'm like, I'm getting there. I'm almost
almost as bright as these.
Okay, so I'm an old codger, and I'm trying to listen, and you're an inspiration. Dude, so
step by step, you're almost
I know,
there.
I'm getting there. I got to go to the yellow. Maybe, I don't know if I'm quite there or not. But listen, man, you have really inspired me on other fronts too. You really, really did a great job on your book, The Millennial Whisper. It was really cool. I got to know you even better through that. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have you today. There's some things that I've preliminarily judged millennials wrong, right? I mean, I have. I'm just going to straight up admit it. I think, before I read your book, before I met you, I had a hard time with it because I thought, these are self-centered people. They don't have any aspirations. They're unwilling to do the hard work. And quite honestly, where I really got in trouble, even with my girls, when I would say this, I'd be like, they're lazy. And that's just not necessarily true. And there's so many good qualities about millennials. They're born in this technological world that we live in today. They really lived through the 9/11, and I think that's really made a huge impact on that generation. I think it's really created within them a desire to do things that matter, more so than even for me when I was young. It's about making money and scaling and having another company. And I think that they've grown up in an era in this technological area of growth where there's a lot of development going on each and every year, but they grew up in the midst of it. And so I know that these guys are really progressive. They're creative. They're far better at thinking than I ever am. And I want to learn from them. And Kevin and I talked, and we said we wanted to bring you on today to really talk more about that. So first, man, tell us some exciting things that you're working on.
Yeah, so for me, it all comes down to authentic connection, right? That's the backbone of everything. It's why we connected, Big A, right? Because you're once you got through the memorable glasses and the tattoos, we connected on a real level, right? And it was both sides, right? I was able to pick, get from you some of the things that you learned throughout your author experiences and where to focus my time. And then, and that's what it's all about, right? And we tend to overcomplicate things within our workplaces. And, there's a couple larger trends that the pandemic only catalyzed that we will talk about. But if I were to summarize it, Big A and Wally, it's that the boomers and Xers, right, which are, let's just put it into tactical, 40 and under, you're a millennial. Right. And 40 to 25, 25, 24, that's the Gen Z cutoff. And if we can't get it right for the older millennials, we're certainly not going to get it right for the Gen Zers. And a lot of new data, actually, I put together all of my new presentations around, sure, my book, The Millennial Whisperer, but more than anything, it's how can we create an environment where all generations and cultures can thrive. And one of the biggest tension points, if you will, is that the younger you get, the more of an expectation that passions exist within your own four walls, whether that be a hospital, whether that be a dental office, whether that be a manufacturing facility or a small professional business. There's this expectation with the younger generation, specifically 35 and under, that passions will be etched. Whereas you juxtapose that to how a lot of us, I'm an Xer barely on the millennial cusp, I'm 42, but you look at how a lot of Xers and boomers look at work. You got to work and you go and play golf for your passions, right? On the weekend. That's why weekends were created. And there's this massive tension that is happening that is not slowing down with you call it the great resignation, you call all these things that are happening. The most recent stats just came out that I was, once again, dissecting for a speech I had this morning. And within the millennial and Gen Z set, the great resignation isn't slowing down. So what can we talk about today that those listening can start taking action on that costs $0 to implement to lower that retention issue that everyone is having a problem around, whether it be a hospital, whether it be, the same, we see these headlines in tech, Adobe laying off. We see, those are somewhat, it's a separate discussion of what's happening in the tech side. And then, as we kind of go into these economic conditions, but at the end of the day, you've got two generations that will quit their jobs. They'll move in with mom and dad without anything else in place because they don't feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. And so, and that's a threat, right? So what is it that we can start doing while also teaching some of these traits that come so naturally to us because we've built this interpersonal muscle? And the example I use there, I'll end with this tirade with that, but look at our flirtations, right? I had a beeper. I was on the cusp of the kind of, technology adoption. I had a beeper in high school, right? When I went to Vanderbilt by you guys, I had one of those Nokia phones my junior year forward. And in order for me to just flirt with someone, I had to pick up the phone, right? I had to talk to mom and dad. I'd get through mom and dad. I would create a list of everything I would talk about. I'd talk to them and I'd be like, well, that went well, right? And that was an interpersonal muscle that was grown. Where you juxtapose that to anyone 35 and under, they're given a brand new iPhone with a Snapchat account and they're sitting on their backs doing this. Yeah. What does that do for an interpersonal muscle? Nothing, right?
Zero.
So it's up to us as leaders to help them hone that and build it. And then the other piece is the fact that a lot of these kids have been, they've been getting participation trophies at every single turn. And their parents, I talk about how I had a parent come in and negotiate the salary on his son's behalf. I'm like, get the hell out of my office, right? And I actually ended up going a little bit further than that. But like, there's also this issue of this snowplow parenting. And so the expectations of both those passions being itched, as well as that role of bosses being both the leader and the mentor and the coach, is a product mostly of this parenting and the social media adoption. And we can go any which way you want.
Yeah, a bunch of questions I have around this. Where do you see the most pushback? Is it from guys my age, Kevin's age? Is it the millennials? I know we need to meet in the middle, right? Yeah. They can learn a few things from us because we've got a few, there's a little water under the bridge for us and we can teach and show. And I'm trying to not be that guy that plants a stake in the ground, says it's this way or no way. I don't want to do that because it's a new generation and I want to learn to work with them.
Sure.
Where are you seeing the most conflict?
The most conflict is actually happening. It's less so with age and it's more about where people fall within the organization, and it's middle management. Because what's happening is these middle managers are trying to steer the ship within a larger domain without necessarily getting access to some of the data and strategy pieces of where it's going, and they're overwhelmed. And they're like, okay, so I've got people quitting left and right. Apparently, they're miserable. I've got to be the manager. I've got to be the strategy. They're just overwhelmed, right? And so it's less of an age thing. Although if I were to kind of pinpoint where it is I get the most pushback, is probably in that kind of 45 to 50-year-old. On either side of it, I think I do pretty well. But it's more about where they fall within the organization. And this is the one thing that I go up against that's the toughest, which is the mentality that, well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? And you look at some of these the simple stuff is on the organizational side. Right. Those things are two sides. Pay, which we keep tweaking up that dial, right? We have a culture problem. We can't keep throwing more money. We're throwing money at the wrong solutions. The same is true for, NCR built a $500 million building here in Atlanta because they had a culture problem. It's like, that's not going to solve your issue. Stop throwing money at the wrong solutions. The piece that we really got to open our mind around is work flexibility. And I am not saying that people should just be allowed to work from wherever they work, right? You look at JP Morgan, they put a stake in the ground. They said, if you want to work here from now on, you got to be in the office 5 days a week because there's no other way you can learn this trade without being on the floor with us. And I applaud them, knowing that they're probably going to lose 30% of their employee pool or potential employee pool, right? And you look at what just this morning, Disney announced that 4 days in the work week, because we cannot be creative by doing this via Zoom. Okay. So I applaud that. And I'm not saying that shouldn't be a solution for you going forward, but you've got to look at the jobs that your employees are doing and whether or not that's the right strategy, right? So creative enterprises, trade enterprises where you actually have to learn by doing and being next to these people, it makes sense. But for a software developer, if I had a software company and I'm telling these developers that now, since the pandemic's over, now that they've got this, dark studio in the basement with their cooler of Mountain Dew, that they can kind of work and get in the zone and flow state whenever they want. When I say you got to come back into this blank cubicle that's going to have distractions all around them, that's not going to be the best decision. Right. And so what I like to do is I use an example of work flexibility needs to be expanded to be, and this, I've been working with a very large hospital system. And it's with these hospitals and these hourly workers, allowing them to feel empowered to do shift exchanges themselves, so that they can decide to when in the week they want to work. If they want to go hang out with their friends as a young nurse on a Friday, they can do a shift exchange with someone else within that system. So it's offering solutions like that around work flexibility, along with an example I use of a company out in California. They have a 99% retention rate. And Wally, I'm gonna quiz you on this, okay? So it's in California. And this company, what they do is on your 1-year anniversary, they have a rule that you're allowed to create your own job description, with the caveat that you can end up doing that job if you sell it into everyone else on your team. Guess the company in California.
Oh, man. I couldn't guess it, but it sounds like a great idea.
Okay, so and I hear back a lot like Facebook or Uber or what. It's Morningstar Tomato Farms. All right.
Yeah, something smaller, right? Yeah.
This is what they do in their manufacturer facility in the middle of farmland, California, and they have this choose your own adventure. How many people end up changing their jobs because of it? Not very many. But at least people feel that they have the freedom to create that. And so Big A, Wally, like to me, we've got to educate ourselves on those easy things that we can start doing. That's the biggest. Right. And then we can talk mostly about leadership, right? And that's where it takes time to retrain leaders to be more in line of what these younger generations are looking for. And that's where, it's training, it's certain tactics like rewards and recognition and other pieces. But those 3 things for leadership are inspirational leadership, autonomy, and transparency. Those are the big 3. They've been the big 3 for the last 4 years, and they haven't changed, even as of the data last night.
Chris, it's not going to be too long before there's a changing of the guards, right? I mean, the millennials are going to become the leaders, the organizations, the CEOs. It's happening as we speak. And so I don't want to be that guy that puts the stake in the ground and holds on to the last minute. Like, I want to be flexible. I want to adapt. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I still struggle with, hey, there are some things that we can do fundamentally that has proven to work. I got 4 decades that prove these things work, right? And so how can we talk to the old guys first? How can we adapt? Like the institution you're referring, the large hospital, how are they accepting the possibilities of what you're proposing on both sids?
So I go in with data, first of all, Big A. I mean, I go in with data.
It's hard to argue data.
It is. Right? And I mean, they first reached, they didn't even know I went to Vanderbilt. And it's within the vicinity of Nashville, right? This hospital system. And so they didn't know I was I would go up there for reunions and stuff. Like, they randomly reached out to me because they Googled that they had a millennial problem, because they got a survey back. In their annual survey, they saw most of their younger employees were miserable. And so it was, as they looked at that, they're like, we need someone to help us with this. And they came across my book. They read the book, then they made it required reading for their managing nurses. And as I was up there in that area meeting with people, I met with them and we looked a little bit further, and they were super surprised at the fact that over 70% of that nursing staff within this hospital were millennials and Gen Zers. They were like, we had no idea this would happen so quickly. And it was on the higher end of that, it was like 78%. And then it was also then looking at through the lens of the questions that we should be asking more frequently. When we were able to look at some of that data, the prescription was right in front of us, right? And some of those solutions, for example, allowing people to make more lateral job moves, right? You hear stories of these nurses that got into nursing because their uncle had a brain tumor, yet they've been stuck in the ER side for 4 years. And then all they want to do is help in the brain tumor side. And it's so hard for them to make those lateral moves. So the solutions are actually right in front of us, like allow people to make more lateral job moves within your own 4 walls. The other pieces around approachability and then understanding how long it's going to take. So one of the big pieces as you look, if you dissect the data, is this both continuous learning is a huge thing. So people want to always feel like they're developing in new areas. And then the other place, and it kind of falls under some of the work flexibility pieces, but it's understanding what it is that they're working towards, right? And so one of the exercises that I help organizations wrap their head around is that within someone's first week on the job, it's super important we lay out those expectations, right? So what's in their job description? Create a job letter for them. What's in your job description now? How long is it until they can expect to be promoted into that next job? Let's just say it's a senior, whatever. How long is that going to take? Is it 2 years? Set the expectations up front, right? And then also know that in order to get promoted into that, set expectations, you've got to be doing everything in that next job description in order to be promoted. And so knowing those pieces of where it is that they're then going and what that trajectory looks like is super important, because what the data is showing is that when people don't feel that, they feel like there's a thumb on top of them. They're like, well, I'm just going to leave and go elsewhere. And I'm also pretty harsh about it, Big A, right? I mean, I have on people's first week, I tell them that I don't negotiate with terrorists clause. And what that means is if anyone goes and gets a job counter, I'm going to let them take it. I'm not going to counter any job offers from another company, no matter what. And just know that going in, I have a no negotiation with terrorist clause. So if you try that strategy with me, I'm going to let you leave that second. And so there's certain things like we've got to take back control in certain areas, and then we've also give control.
You know,
Chris, I got a question real quick. We're talking a lot about larger organizations. There's obviously a lot of folks that are listening to this that, you mentioned the example of the tomato farm being a smaller business. Does all this translate directly? Like you talk about ladders and being a small business owner for so many years myself and growing a company from 0 to 40, that doesn't seem like a lot of people, but it was for me. Right. So like, it's not that easy. Like I struggled with this a lot. And so what translates and what doesn't, Chris?
Yes. I love that question. So I love small business. And the reason I love small business is they're efficient and they're usually entrepreneurial run, which means my impact can be almost immediate. Let's just say 6 weeks for them to test something. And so because of that, I did a lot of work in the dentistry space. And there's no better example of small business than dentists. They actually have the #1 suicide rate of any other profession. And I discovered why in working so closely with them for the last 2 years. And one is that they're all overwhelmed, right? And you have two types of dentists. So as we do with a lot of leaders, some got into dentistry because they just want to fix teeth, right? They don't want to have to deal with the HR and the marketing and all this stuff, right? So it's more of a strategy that we've got to build the right team around those leaders to then actually run the ship while they do their craft. Or it's the opposite, where you take someone like myself and you throw them into a small business and you're asking them to be a specific, craftsman, where it's like, no, I just want to do the lead and come up with ideas and real estate and, some of that stuff. And so it's, okay, get your butt out of this seat over the next year, hire associates, attract those associates, package it accordingly, and then get your butt out of the seat of that dental chair. And so while I've been also working with them, I hit a lot of these guys are like, Chris, you talk about inspirational leadership, for example, right? And one of the things, I did some work with Tony Robbins, and he said, Chris, do you know what HAE is? I was like, no. Well, he goes, well, that's what inspirational leadership is. And the problem today is LAE. I was like, Tony, what's HAE and LAE? He goes, LAE is low ass energy. And that is the biggest problem with these inspirational leaders because they're not bringing any energy. I was like, oh my gosh, I love that interpretation. So I work with, so this one introverted dentist, for example, Wally, he turns to me after one of these sessions as I was talking about the importance of HAE. And he goes, Chris, I'm an introvert. And he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I don't know how to bring the HAE. And I was like, okay, well, let's brainstorm for a second. What are some of those things that you could do? How often are you bringing your team together, and when is it in the week? Is it a weekly thing? He goes, yeah, every Monday morning at 7:30. I go, okay, perfect. What if we use music to then bring in some of that HAE, that high S energy? And he goes, oh my gosh, I've got the best idea, Chris. I got to go. I was like, okay, well, I guess that worked, right? 6 weeks later, Dr. Miller calls me and he goes, Chris, this has been the single greatest thing. I've got the best material for your speeches because it works. I was like, well, tell me about it. He goes, every Monday morning at 7:30, I play Chaka Khan's Tell Me Something Good over the loudspeakers. And that's everyone's cue to then congregate in our lame coffee room. And everyone tells me something good of what happened that week. And it's how it takes zero energy out of me, Chris. I just crank up the volume and then we start talking. And I was like, what a great example, right? And then some of the other pieces that also I think apply to, this piece of genuine connection and taking a vested interest in all of our, especially in small business, they're expecting you as a leader to take a vested personal interest in their lives as people as well as workers. And that's different than any generation than before. And so
that's tough.
It is. And it doesn't scale, right? I had a friend that his assistant called me, was like, Chris, what did you tell Hank? Because I can't get a dinner scheduled with him and any of his clients because he's now taking every single employee out to dinner and he's booked up for the next month. I was like, oh, he's misinterpreted this need for what I call the flyby. And flybys happen in a day where you're just checking in on your team and saying, Sally, on a Monday, I heard you went to the Blue Ridge Mountains. It sounded epic. Like, tell me more about that. Or, that dog that you adopted, it's taking that vested interest. And that's a product of this really issue or sociological piece that's happened as parents. If you look at how these millennials and Gen Zers were parented, it's very different than our relationship with our parents. It's not nearly, when I sat down across from my dad at the dinner table, it was authoritarian. He says, Christopher, how are your grades? Are they good enough for Vanderbilt? Did you score in the game? Okay, great. All right, you're dismissed, right? Whereas these younger guys, they're playing beer pong out back and talking about who they just hooked up with. So when they come into our organization, they see you as the boss and leader in the same way that they see their parents. And they're like, well, why are they so strict here? How come they're not asking like how I'm doing, right? And so that art of the flyby, and I use kind of Hank as one of the examples where it's like, it doesn't take a dinner. It's actually just checking in on your people. And for example, for these manufacturers and even dentists, what I suggest to these leaders is move your desk next to the punch out clock, and it forces that flyby. And don't make sure that you don't say, why are you late? Why are you checking out early? And instead use that touch point. Right. Use that touch point.
Don't put a camera up.
Exactly. Use that touch point as, how are you doing? What's going on? Like, did you have a great weekend? And tell me more. And so, those are some of the tactics that work, I feel like, even more so in these smaller businesses that don't necessarily, it takes a while to scale that within the larger organizations.
That's good.
Chris, we've got our newest team member is mid-20s, just under that. And she had an opportunity at another company. But because of the transformational experience that the members are receiving within our organization, she chose to come with us. Talk to us about their willingness and desire to make an impact, to make a difference.
So if you look at older millennials, so they're now almost 41. And you look at that tranche, I split millennials into older millennials, so like 41 to 35 and then 35 to 24. So it's kind of in those two. Then the reason for that is when they were exposed to social media. Okay. And so your older millennial set, they're going to have better interpersonal muscles, right? They're going to be better with this, the face-to-face stuff, probably a little bit more receptive to feedback on the fly, but the other piece of it is that there's less of that expectation around purpose. So there's a need for purpose with older millennials. The greatest difference starts to happen out of any other statistic. The younger you get in the millennial set and into Gen Z, the more of an expectation that not only there's a purpose at your organization, but that it's doing some sort of societal good in the world. Right. And I think a lot of companies mistake this for trying to take a political stance. And that is not what I'm advocating at all. Right. And instead, you've got to figure out with whatever it is that you provide, how are you giving back to society as a whole? And one of my favorite tactics in my arsenal that follows this is around rewards and recognition. There was a company I worked with, and we came up with a pretty cool idea because they made flooring, right? They're like, listen, we make flooring. Like, I don't know how that's, I mean, maybe we could tell the story about how that helps families, but like, it's kind of far-fetched. I was like, no, listen, here's what we're going to do. Who is it? What's the nonprofit that you guys give back to? And this gentleman talked about how he chooses the nonprofit that then they give, these $100,000 checks to when they hit these goals, but it's his nonprofit. I said, so here's what we're going to do. Put it on your employees on a monthly basis. Have them choose the nonprofit of their choice. All right. They vote on it. And then if they hit the goals, they're the ones that we'll make a big check, even if it's like for $400, and we'll let them reward that nonprofit of their choice when they hit those goals. And it'll be part of this kind of reward system baked into your environment. And it has done, now we're in the second year of it, and it's created a huge, their retention is better than it's ever been, that being one of the biggest reasons why from what we've seen in the data. And so I guess Big A, like they're first of all, it's a must now, especially if you're trying to attract 35 and under. And there are creative ways that you can start walking the talk. The other side of that same thing is that you also have two generations that they despise hypocrisy. So if you don't walk the talk, or if you're saying one thing and doing another,
sniff you out in a minute.
They're going to call you out.
Yeah. I love that. And you do see what you just said all the time. They're really interested in sustainability. They're looking at the social justice. They're looking at economic equality. And if we're not talking about those things and we're not teaching and we're not instructing, we're first of all not even going to be enlisting them to come in work with us. And so it's something that's taking time for me to learn because it's new, right?
Sure.
For me, it was like, hey, let's go get after it. We're a for-profit organization. Here's what you need to do. The way I was taught, like same way as your dad led you, you know, when you were young. And if we're going to stay in the game and we're going to attract this type of person, we've got to do these type things.
And it's positioning it that way, right? Big A, quickly. Like it's so like, think about I know personally how many lives have been impacted by you, right? And what you've done. I know, and I can tell those stories. And when you're not telling the worker bee with their head down, some of these stories that happen every single day, you're doing your own self a disservice and that's what happens, right? We get so busy doing our things. And it's also up to us. And what I try to teach as many young people as I can is that money and impact go hand in hand. We can't be doing a nonprofit. We can't be running and I'm not going to, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? But like, it's up to us to help educate some of those pieces as to what that is as well. Sorry, Wally.
No, I had this experience. You guys were talking about this and I just remembering how much I thought I was being successful, but then you just reminded me actually that I didn't follow through well. Let me give you an example. Had a company that provided website and marketing services to RV dealerships. Well, how in the world do you find like good human experience and purpose in that, right? Like you're helping people spend tens of thousands of dollars on a product that some of them probably shouldn't even be buying. I mean, to be frank, right? And that's just how it is. So I struggled with this and I had a younger team and I came up with this idea through listening to them that, man, at the end of the day though, I'm an RVer myself. And so when you go camping, it's either a really good experience or a really bad experience. Like you have an example of one of those if you've ever gone. And so the idea is it creates stories, but it creates stories that you can tell around the Thanksgiving dinner table with the beautiful turkey for generations to come. Right. But what I failed to do, that's where I stopped. And you guys are just, as you're saying this, I'm like, oh man, I kind of missed it. Like I didn't go collect the stories.
Exactly. Right.
If I would have brought those stories back in and made that part of the mission, that would have been it. Like, wow. Okay.
I talk to a lot of small businesses that are just that, Wally. It's that they think they can't compete with the Nikes of the world because they're selling screws. And it's not about what you're selling. It's not about what your office looks like. It's not about how big your coffee bar or barista bar is, not ping pong tables, whatever it is. None of that matters. What matters is this underlying piece of authentic connection and continuous growth. And when you can do that, doesn't mean the best statistically, I see the statistics of these companies and they're all the ones you wouldn't expect that are doing the best, right? It's the tomato paste farms that are getting creative and implementing some of these things that at the end of the day, all employees can walk out feeling it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? They feel loved, accepted, and recognized. And I think that's what we all want, but we don't necessarily set up the systems and touch points to prioritize that.
Chris, a few minutes ago, I had to run up to the bank and picked up my phone and called one of our team members. And I said, the past 2 times I've talked to you, you seemed a little distracted. And I just wanted to check in on you, just wanted to see if you were okay. This person's a millennial. Mm-hmm. It was a game changer. Mm. It was like, man, you took time out in the middle of the day to give me a call. And we were able to talk through that, told me some concerns, some problems that they were facing. And it was a 10-minute call. Mm. And it means everything. One of my past customers, clients I coached, owned a big organization, 600 employees. And I asked him how many direct reports he had. All these were millennials. He said, I have a dozen direct reports. I said, here's what you're going to do for the next 12 weeks. You're going to take them out to lunch. And you're going to get in their life and you're going to find out exactly what they've got going on. The only thing you can't do is mention yourself or your company.
I love it.
2 months later, he called me and he said, game changer. Mm. This is a game changer. I had no idea what they had going on, their goals, their aspirations, the things that they wanted to accomplish, didn't know anything about their families. And this has brought them together like nothing I've ever done in this company.
I love it.
So what you're teaching is gold. Thank you for doing that. What is the next right steps? If you were instructing me today,
Sure.
Okay, Big A, practically speaking, if you've got an organization, if you're trying to attract millennials, if you've already got a team, what would be some practical steps that they could take to make a step? Like, we can't change the whole culture of our companies overnight, right? How can we get started? What should they do?
So, I mean, in my arsenal, right? Like I think of, if there's just one thing that people can walk away with. And this is both inside our walls and outside our walls. And it's going to make some of those listeners feel uncomfortable when I suggest it. And that is the power of a video text message. And it's all on your phone. And all you have to do is, and I'll actually do this with my new keynote around my new book, which is about saving your asks, right? And creating that relationship. When it's not too big of a group, I have them walk out and I say, I want you to video text message someone in your life that's had the largest impact on you creating a new branch of your own tree. And I want you to thank them for the first time, maybe ever, with a video text message. You don't have to, if it feels too awkward, just put it in your bank of videos. And when you're feeling up to it, send it. And the same is true as we move to a lot of our workers are virtual. So how do we actually create that touch point? Sending that video text message and just keeping it 20 seconds. And it's as simple as, Big A, dude, I am so psyched that we reconnected on your pod today. That was awesome. You guys have such good energy and let's change the world together, right? So I send, no joke, no exaggeration, 20 to 30 of those a day. And what I'm able to do is take what would happen in 5 phone conversations or, even with a potential client that I'm trying to get a big speaking engagement with. I'm able to take what would have been 7 months of courtship and I shorten it to, like, in some cases, a week and a half. And what's also surprising is people's immediate reaction is they'll awkwardly video back, right? Because you're able to see emotion. You're able to see your eyes, Aaron, versus just hearing it. And that to me is one of the biggest game changers, right? The other piece of...
Will my conversion rate double if my glasses are yellow?
No, but also stay true to who you are. Dude, those new glasses,
I'll go buy some.
Those new glasses are killer.
They'll do it.
Huge,
these clear ones will do it.
Huge upgrade. Huge upgrade. No, you're good. And I'm not suggesting everyone go get crazy classes. Like, I have a matching Bronco.
It's your personality, and I love
bring
it.
light, right? Like, I mean, and that's the other piece. So, in terms of some of the other pieces, and this is what especially when I look at these middle managers that are overwhelmed, a lot of times the reason for that overwhelming feeling is a handful of those people are in the wrong positions for the wrong reasons. And so we've got lots of great tools available to us. Predictive index, I use culture index. And what I do is I do an analysis of their leaders, and I tell them who's in the wrong positions, who's burned out, who's in the right positions. And what's crazy is that you usually have all of the right people. It's just each one of them are in the wrong positions. Why do you have a COO that's low detail? Right? Or why do you have I actually ended up firing an assistant a couple of years ago after I got into this culture index. And I was made aware of it through the dental space. And that's what we would use to then take action on the rest of the year. And so I would suggest we've got amazing tools available to us. We've got to ground some of these changes within our organizations around data so we can allow more people to be in the right jobs for the right reasons that match up to both their strengths and passions. And I'll end kind of that same question with this, which is the most important question we can ask anyone, whether that be, the person sitting across next to us in church at the end of church, or, I've used it with waiters. I've done it with my chimney repair guy. And I've also done it with some of these really hard to pin down super connector entrepreneurs that are well known. And I'll ask them, what is your dream? What fires you up? Right? It was actually how I first got in touch. I went to dinner with our mutual friend, Patrick, and he went all of dinner being totally, kind of monotone until he started talking about these baby goats. And I was like, Patrick, I don't know if anyone's told you this, but you need some more baby goats in your life. This is the first time you come alive. And he goes, you know what, Chris, with tears in his eyes, he goes, I do need more baby goats in my life. I was like, hell yeah, let's write the book Baby Goat Whisperer. And he laughed and that was our connection, right? And he actually ended up doubling down on some of those baby goats. But
he went and bought a 250 acre farm.
Exactly, right? But even with recruitment, let's say you're trying to recruit a big leader and it's a courtship, right? It's just like you would land a sales prospect. And when we start asking those questions and someone feels vulnerable enough to tell you what it is that their dream is, when we can take one action to help them achieve that, that's where the magic happens. And let's just say it's some prospect that you're trying to attract as a leader within your organization. When they tell you your dream, and then you can immediately say, well, guess what? The position that we're hiring for here, this is how that is going to create more of a foundation into getting you to that next thing. I get goosebumps talking about this because for whatever reason, we do everything by the script, right? And so I think by implementing some of these strategies, we can have almost immediate impact. And guess what? It costs $0. I'm not saying anyone has to buy anything, right? It's just doing things a little bit differently than the way that we were all brought up.
Chris, you've been a big inspiration today on how to deal with millennials, not only millennials, but just people in general. And so all these tactics and strategies, caring, having a genuine, interesting conversation with somebody that's authentic. If you want to reach out to Chris, you can do so at christuff.me, ChrisTuff.me, or his favorite place to hang out, Instagram at Tuff, TUFF22. Chris, thank you for being with us today. Hey, get a chance, go grab his book, The Millennial Whisperer. You'll learn a lot about him. Or Save Your Ask, his newest book that came out in 2022. I think you'll enjoy it immensely. Chris, thanks for being with us, buddy.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's interview as much as I did. I can't even begin to tell you the practical steps that I've learned from Chris going through understanding how to deal with the Gen Zs, the millennials. It's not only that, though, just people in general. I love some of his tips that he gave, and it doesn't cost us a penny to do those things. So I want you to go out there today and try it, right? Really go in the face of those fears and being timid as it relates to reaching out and maybe doing some of these video texting. Chris is a pro at it. He's done it all across many stages across America, teaching these processes. And I want you to take these things that he's taught us today, how we can go out and build better companies, and also how you can begin to build a life where you have a view from the top.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. As always, you can reach out to us via email, pod@viewfromthetop.com. Happy to connect with you there. And again, thanks for joining us. We'll see you all next week.